Hey, welcome back to Spellbound. I'm BJ the Book Witch, and this is an episode of Tabled Content. So this is Tabled Content, and this is where we dive a little deeper into our books to talk about subtext and other bookish topics. And today we're talking about separating the art from the artist. Okay, so I'm hearing a lot of people talk about cancel culture, and it's definitely a hot topic. But don't worry, we're not really going to be talking about that. Although, if you want my 2 cents, if you firmly believe that everybody with a professional platform should be able to say whatever they want without fear of professional repercussions, then I think that we all owe a huge collective apology to the band formerly known as the Dixie Chicks, now known as the Chicks. And until that happens, I'm not entirely convinced that it's just a free speech issue for you. But like I said, we're not going to be talking about that. I'm here to talk about what it means to separate the art from the artist, and sometimes that does overlap with cancel culture. For example, am I here to say that we should continue to support Raging Turf JK Rowling? Absolutely not. She and her hate groups will receive no monetary or promotional support from me. But I'm not here to talk about what we do with JK Rowling. I'm here to talk about what we do with Harry Potter. And in fact, for this episode, I'm putting Harry Potter in conversation with Endless Night by Agatha Christie. So let's start with the basics. Rowling is alive, Christie is dead. Rowling writes middle grade, Christie wrote mysteries, and they both wrote incredibly influential and lasting works that defined something. Now, personally, Agatha Christie was much more of an influential or staple in my life and my childhood than JK Rowling was. I didn't read any of the Harry Potters or watch any of the Harry Potters until last year, but I did grow up watching Miss Marple movies and TV adaptations of Agatha Christie's mysteries on TCM and TV, so I'm just more familiar with her work. But what about the content of what they wrote? Harry Potter is a middle grade series that many of my peers and contemporaries grew up reading. It helped define a generation and, in many ways, define a genre. Christie, on the other hand, wrote dozens and dozens of books, murder mysteries, that are still being read, that are still interesting, and that are still being studied because they're not only still part of the literary discourse for their quality of writing. Honestly, one of my favorite scenes ever written is from an Agatha Christie novel, Three Blind Mice. It's written like a nursery rhyme and actually ends in a crescendo. It's brilliant writing. But because they also helped define a genre. She, in many ways, established pieces of the formula that's still used in mysteries and cozy mysteries today. Now here's where the tricky part comes in. Both of these works, both highly influential in their own right, have problematic content or a problematic author. Now, I don't know anything about Agatha Christie's life, and in fact I don't need to, because there's problematic content in her work. She continually uses harmful stereotypes and derogatory and pejorative, outdated terms for entire groups of people and includes very non-native sentiments. Now, nothing in Harry Potter is that cut and dry, but we do know an awful lot about the problematic author because she is still alive and she continues to actively spew anti-trans hateful rhetoric. So the question is, what do we do with these books? Now, we're readers, we like books, we learn a lot from books, so we know that it's not as easy as throwing the baby out with the bathwater here and trashing these books entirely. So how do we approach this in a way that does justice to the work itself while not justifying, promoting, or ignoring the very real concern here? You know, this is tricky stuff. And the most important thing is that we have these conversations in the first place. And what has made everything so tense is the fact that we have collectively not had these conversations when we should have. So we're having them all right now. And in the thick of it, and in the thick of what conservatives would call cancel culture or progressives would call consequence culture, there's a lot of movement and action. Granted, important movement and important action. But with that action, to some, it may feel like important parts of our history or culture or zeitgeist is being taken away. And it's not, but I'm trying to be impartial here. But my prescription is, first of all, have the conversation. So if there's something here that I'm saying that you disagree with or you find incorrect, then please let me know and join in the conversation. I'm absolutely open to other opinions and points of view, especially from people who know more than I do on these topics. And as long as your point of view isn't that trans people aren't people, or that authors should be able to put harmful rhetoric into their books without professional consequences, then I am here for your opinion, and I think that we could have a productive dialogue. Okay, so step 1, have the conversation, which we're doing. Hi, hello. But what else? How do we treat these books, these important, influential books? For so many of my peers and fellow booktubers, I've seen you wrestle with this, with the utmost sincerity and vulnerability and disappointment. What do I do with my Harry Potter books? And I've seen a lot of people make the decision to keep their HP books personal and private and special unto themselves, and not to share or promote JK Rowling's future works. And I think that that was a difficult decision for so many because I know what this series means to you. And because you're in a tricky situation here. JK Rowling is still alive, so this idea of canceling or whatever very much still applies to her. You don't want to give her a platform, and you don't want to share or promote harmful rhetoric. So you're having a much more active role than you otherwise might have had. But Agatha Christie, she's dead, so she's no longer benefiting from her platform. And her situation is a little different, right? So for Harry Potter, the main issue is the author. And as far as I know, there's no direct anti-trans rhetoric in the series, but if I'm incorrect on that, please let me know. But the issue there is the author. But that's different from Christie. I don't know anything about her as a person. She might have been hateful, and given her writing, probably, but so is everyone. Now, does that make it okay? Absolutely not, but it doesn't matter because her work was harmful. It was also, separately, brilliant in many ways, and influential. So what do we do with that? We hear a lot, or we used to hear a lot, that it's very important to separate the art from the artist. Divorce the two. Completely remove the creator from the creation. As if that's possible. You know, growing up in the church, the number one evangelistic defense of God as an intelligent and divine creator is his creation. We can't ever truly separate the art from the artist, as much as we would like to, but sometimes it is easier than others, and Harry Potter is a good example of that. Internally, we can appreciate the beauty and the immersiveness of this world that did shape so many of our lives and childhoods, and still ignore that JK Rowling is a living, breathing, hateful human being. Absolutely. But externally, that becomes a little more difficult, right? And let's take a look at our own community here, the bookish community, where we gush and rave and recommend other books and worlds and words and inspiration to each other and other readers. And as special as that book or that series is to us right now, very few of us would recommend it to others because in doing so, it would indirectly promote JK Rowling and her hateful rhetoric. So we don't. We don't promote it and we don't share it. So that's what I mean. You can't separate the art from the artist even now. They are inextricably linked. And for Christie, all we have of her legacy is her books. The good, the bad, the influential, and the harmful. And we can't separate them. We can't only take the good books and ignore the ones that depict indigenous peoples or immigrants or minorities as gross stereotypes. And in some cases, those books are one and the same. So again, we can't separate the art from the artist. So we should stop trying to. It's okay to love Harry Potter for all the reasons that we do and still choose not to talk about it or share it or promote it because of the harm that JK Rowling still actively perpetuates. And it's okay to still study Agatha Christie's writing in literature and in genre mystery writing courses because of its place in the current literary discourse, as long as we acknowledge the harm that is also present on those pages. Because in fact, as soon as we choose to ignore the harm, the hateful, the racist, when we attempt in these odd and sidestepping ways to desperately separate the art from the artist, we're preventing real dialogue from happening, and we're creating an environment that makes us unable to discern what should be acknowledged and what should be discarded. You can't separate the art from the artist, for better or worse. So when we talk about art, and as writers and as readers, we do. We have to acknowledge it all. That's how these conversations happen, and that's how we move forward. So what do you think? What are some ways that you've had to have these conversations with your friends or fellow readers? How were you able to reconcile Harry Potter and its problematic author? Or what about other famous works that perhaps shaped you or influenced you, or even your writing style that also includes harmful rhetoric? Let me know in the comments below. I would really love to hear from you. Thanks so much for sticking around. For more on these books and others, follow me on Instagram. And if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you loved it, hit subscribe. And as always, happy reading. Thanks.